Just a reminder, please silence your cell phones. Thank you very much. All right, good evening, everyone. Thank you for attending the Pullman Police Advisory Committee. I'm Stephanie Rink, the chair, and welcome. I would like everyone, please, from starting with my left, to introduce yourself and say what constituency you're with.
Good evening, Craig Watt, ad hoc. Forgot to hit Craig Watt, ad hoc area. Thank you.
My name is Eric Tetzoff, Business Community.
Barbara Hammond, College Hill.
Rocky Lucas, WSU faculty.
Krista Gross, at large.
Oh, sorry.
Carol Dambuki, I think I'm multicultural.
Jake Opgenorth with Pullman Police Department.
Gary Jenkins, Police Chief.
Phyllis Stahlkopf, Sunnyside Hill.
Isabella Macon, Pullman High School representative.
David Macon, Multicultural Representative.
Angie Center, WSU faculty staff.
Great, thank you. So our next order of business is the approval of the minutes from June 14th. As you know, July 12th, we did not have a meeting. Instead, we had the Citizens Academy. Does anybody have any questions, comments, or concerns or edits on the minutes of June 14th? Okay, do we have a motion to approve?
I'll move to approve minutes.
Do we have a second?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, minutes pass. Our next order of business, we are going to discuss the National Night Out, which was on Tuesday, August 3rd. So I was at Sunnyside Park with Krista. Thank you very much, and wonderful photos that you took of us. I will just say it was a fun event. We had several people come, but I will let Krista talk more about that.
I will be happy to talk about that. So we were there with Alex Gordon, thank you, who just had so much fun with the kids who came. So we gave out junior police officer badge, some fingerprinting booklets, some coloring books. Bless his heart, and by his, I mean Alex's, because a lot of the kids were in there playing so long that I think they ran out his battery. So another officer had to come and jumpstart his rig. But it was fun. He was a good sport. I made up some little flyers for us to give out. I gave out 2 because Sunnyside Hill has no vacancies, but Military Hill has one, and I think Pioneer Hill has 2, and we had 2 people from there, so I kind of nudged those along, but we had a lot of kids, so ours was fun, and Stephanie shoved me in the back and took me in, and it
For
was
the record,
really,
I did not shove
she
her
did
in the
not,
back.
but it was really scary. We had fun.
We did have a lot of fun. Thank you, Krista. Anybody would like to report on Military Hill?
So it was very quiet. We had a few kids come. Jake stopped by for a while. I say kids came with their parents, but anyway, our takeaway from it was that we need signage. Either that or we need to try the park by the...
What was that? You needed more signage?
Signage, yes. At Terraview Park, we're up in the shelter, and you really can't see the street very well from there. And, yeah. And then either that or try the park up over the aquatic center, because, I don't know, the time I was up there, it was quite busy, so I'm not really sure.
Okay.
But
So we had about 55, you think, right at Sunnyside? Okay. Pioneer or College?
Me and Angie were at College Hill, and Barbara too. Sorry, Barbara. So we did not have a large crowd, I don't think, but we had a very active, bustling crowd that came. I had the opportunity to meet a lot of folks in the area that I had not met before, and Do you remember the name? Like there was a police officer he's trying to become a police officer. He's in recruitment. Do you remember his name? I don't either, but we had a really delightful police officer to be possibly who came, and I had a chance to tell him about the advisory council and what we do. So it was really nice seeing all the people that were. Seems like College Hill already has the active association, so there's already that sense of connection there. Though the crowd wasn't big, so I wasn't, in comparison to last year, what was it?
Well, it was bigger than last year,
Okay.
but that's because there were more of us.
Oh,
So we counted 28 people came, 15 of them were either College Hill Association board members or police advisory board members or police. I mean, they weren't like free-floating neighborhood residents, but there were a couple families that came, so that was good. And we had fun.
It was a great time.
Well, that's all that matters, right, as long as we have fun. Anybody from Pioneer Hill? So I know Pioneer was small, but Barbara, you asked for this to be on the agenda. What is your discussion item for this?
I guess one person from my constituency said that they wondered if the police department felt that it was enough of a community impact to continue doing this. It's a bad time, it's a bad date for College Hill because students aren't back yet. And we have fewer and fewer permanent residents.
So I know it's a national night out, so it's nationwide on that date, so we can't actually change the date with it not becoming the national night out. But there has been talk when we were up at Sunnyside, looking at it, of combining the parties into one event, sharing resources, so we have more officers attending, different resources that we can do. So that was one of the discussion items that we talked about at the Sunnyside event, as looking at that and having much better planning, well in advance planning. My event manager on our professional side would know that her and I both would like more planning on that. And if we did that and had better outreach to the entire community and planning, we could have a much better event. Thoughts?
Let me give a little background on this year. In previous years, this has been organized by Pullman 2040, by a committee from Pullman 2040, and we had been asked essentially just to have an officer show up and be part of the event that they were hosting. And so that's what we had done in the past. This year, they were not quite sure whether they were going to be able to even have the event just because of COVID. And then when it got to the point where they felt they could have it, it was so late in the game that they couldn't even get enough people together to help plan it. But they said they would help provide some refreshments if we wanted to get in on the planning and providing staffing. So Stephanie and I talked about it, and we agreed to do that. So that's part of the reason why there was not a big marketing push far enough in advance, because it was a kind of a last-minute decision. And this really wasn't our event. It was the Pullman 2040 event that we were helping with. So they probably wouldn't mind if we wanted to take more ownership of it in the future. I know there have been discussions previously about having it at one location instead of at different hills. So I think that's something that we can continue to discuss.
I mean, on my part, I would say that what I saw primarily where I was just the word needed to get out more, because very few people actually knew and very few people actually showed up. And again, part of that might be signage and part of that might just be getting people, more prior advance notice. But
Great, thank you. Anything else, Barbara, that you wanted to attend? Okay. So we will discuss this further next year. Okay, next. What? Yes, very much so, David. Okay, next is our Pullman PD Citizens Academy recap. So we, as you know, we had the run-through starting July 12th. I believe that went fantastic. It went really good. The officers really hit their goals of what I told them or asked them to do on really bringing their humor, the human side of them out in their presentations, and they were really able to capture that and capture our audience of those that participated. We did a really great job. Most of them got all their presentations and on time and did a great job with that, and it was great. Chief, would you like to say anything more on that?
No, I agree. I was really proud of our staff at the police department. I think they did a fantastic job presenting. I want to work there after listening to them. So.
Maybe you shouldn't retire. So our fall session, it's an invitation only that starts September 16th. Our officers and staff are starting, well, they started last week. I was supposed to finish last week, but I'm still working on it this week, is getting all of their feedback. And I've met with a couple on their feedback one-on-one. Most of them are just via email because they did a really great job. Those that need a little bit of presentation help, I've been working with them. And they will have a template to use that I created. And so that will be going good. And Chief, I did talk with somebody who did apply, and they're very excited for it. Spoke with them today. They're quite excited for the fall event. Commander, would you like to say anything about it since you were there a couple times?
Well, I can promise that I'll be more prepared next time. And I have some fixing to do, but from what I hear, everybody, I think everybody is excited about it, so that's good.
Perfect. All right, next order of business is our patrol vehicle sticker discussion. Chief?
So, over the past couple of months, I received a couple of complaints about a sticker that was on our car. And it was, on the complaints, it was described to me as a thin blue line flag sticker, which would be like this without the lettering and writing on there. It would have just been the flag with the thin blue line. And so I explained to those that were complaining that that isn't what it was, that it's a memorial sticker for Deputy DeRozier. And Deputy DeRozier was a Cowlitz County deputy sheriff who was shot and killed in 2019. The reason that we have his stickers on our cars is because he previously worked with the Whitman County Sheriff's Department for 3 years and worked with our staff closely. So he was a local to us. And so I don't know exactly who made the sticker. It was either the Cowlitz County or it was Whitman County. And this is something that's typically done. I know that when the sergeant in Coeur d'Alene a few years ago was shot and killed, there was a similar sticker that we had on our cars to memorialize him as well. So anyway, I wanted to bring it to your attention to let you know that that is an issue that's come up, and I think there are still some people who think that regardless of what it is, if it has that flag with the blue line on it, then that's unacceptable. I'm willing to talk about it more. I just wanted to see what the thoughts of the committee members are on that.
I know I'm going to make you defend something that you did not create, but do you have any idea why they use more of this look rather than something that is more neutral, like a shield with a the black ribbon over it or something.
You know, I can only speculate. I wasn't involved in the creation of it. I know that myself and most of the law enforcement people that I talk to about the flag is that it represents support for law enforcement. It represents sacrifices law enforcement makes. It represents law enforcement standing between violence and chaos and the community. And so I think to use it in a memorial for an officer who actually gave ultimate sacrifice is appropriate. So I'm just speculating, but.
Do you know, like you mentioned having something like that before, how long does that generally stay on vehicles?
I don't recall how long we had we might have even had them on until we put these on. Deputy DeRozier was a lot more connected with us than Coeur d'Alene, but I don't know the exact timeline.
Do you have a clue what the people find offensive about that? What are they associating it with?
Yeah,
whatever?
so what I hear a couple of things. One is I hear that people think that the thin blue line flag was created in response to Black Lives Matter, as counter to Black Lives Matter. I've heard other people say that they heard that it was used in an event that was like a white supremacist type of an event, and so the flag was seen at this type of an event, and so to them, then that's what that flag represents. So those are the two that I have heard on this topic.
I've also heard from veterans that anytime you take the red, white, and blue flag and deface it in any way, that they feel offended by that. And just, yeah.
Yeah, I think to no fault of your own, the reality is it's been politicized. It hasn't been politicized by your department, or certainly our community, but that's the uncomfortable reality that law enforcement faces, is that you don't represent it that way, but there are people who do, who stand in opposition, and that's what makes agencies have these difficult conversations around what should they do. Yeah, I mean, it's politicized. It is. And I don't know where we as a community stand on that. I know as a government employee, I can't put anything in my office that's politicized. I'm not able to do that. It's a violation of policy. But that's different than Black Lives, or Blue Lives Matter or Black Lives Matter. That's not what that is. It's something completely different. And I don't know how you can memorialize in a better way that's not offensive to members of the community, while staying true to what you're trying to memorialize. So it's good that we're having a conversation around it. But yeah, it's not a thin blue line, right? That's not what it's designed to do. It's memorializing a tragedy. So yeah, I don't have an answer. If it was a Blue Lives Matter and that's all it was, that'd be an easy conversation to have. That's not, because it's a mixture of the two, and that's much more challenging.
So I just want to share, I completely understand the full-hearted good that was behind the intention of the creation of this. However, I know there's a significant portions of students on my campus who are, especially students who are just of any kind of marginalized population that would be very disappointed that this was remaining after it had been pointed out.
But if it was pointed out incorrectly of what it stands for?
Well, I think that like Dave was saying, at this point, for better or worse, it's become politicized. So even if we know, even if we know that this wasn't created to be offensive, and we know that it's created to be something good, that we're not going to convince that to groups of people who look at that and are triggered by what they see as like the thin blue line imagery.
And how do we speak to the family members of the ones that are lost? So just speaking, not that long ago, a friend of mine lost her husband in Clark County. So they are going to be doing the same exact thing. So how do you then speak to the family members?
Well, it kind of goes back to Krista's question when you were asking like who created this. Like ultimately, whoever created this was probably a couple years ago before, it became politicized. And so I think the solution for the long term would be we create a more memorial that has more neutral imagery. I don't know the answer to like whether or not we take it off right now or put something up right now.
Eric?
Well, I mean, I guess I look at it and say, I think you want to look at what your objective is in working with the community, in the sense of if there's people who, well, since there are people who are offended by it in a sense, I think it's wiser not, I mean, again, not saying anything about what's done right now, but I think it's wiser not to put that, the political, the part that's political, if you want to call, that's politicized on, not because we want to, not because we don't understand what it really means, but because many people don't understand it, and it's not our goal to offend those people or to drive those people away from the police. We want to draw them toward that, right? And if having stuff like this fails to accomplish that, then we don't want to have that, right? Again, like other people say, I think the solution is to memorialize people like this, not using things that have been politicized. Somehow figure out a way to do it, a different kind of sticker, a different something that enables us to memorialize them without the potentially political message.
Yes, Carol?
Thanks. Justin was a coug. Katie, his wife, was a coug. There's so many ways we can celebrate that young man and his loss and leaving behind his baby girl. We don't have to mix the message. We can celebrate this young man. He was wonderful. But we don't have to distract from how wonderful he was by putting his name in front of something that some people are offended by. I don't know.
Have I lost my marbles, or did they used to, or was there a time when you would put a black ribbon over a badge?
Yeah, that's one way that's represented. Yeah, warning badge.
And can you also tell me what, was that like his badge number or something?
So those were his call letters. One was from Whitman County and one was from Cowlitz County. Yeah.
Which is the one from Whitman County, the P?
Yeah, Paul 13. So let me throw this into the mix as part of the conversation, because I want to make sure that we're not creating double standards. Has the term Black Lives Matter been politicized? So would use of that term also be controversial?
That was on the card that we conversation.
You said it, Rocky. I answered a lot of emails and calls from law enforcement asking what should we do, and so I always say, would you juxtapose the Blue Lives Matter and Black Lives Matter right next to each other in solidarity? Would that be what you would do? And honestly, I don't know if we would. I think I'd like to believe in Pullman that wouldn't be a problem at all. I say absolutely, right? Because we're standing in solidarity. You can stand in solidarity with both communities at the same time. I think sometimes we forget that. They don't have to be in opposition. But again, we're dealing with something that I think your point is well made, and probably the best that's been made here so far, is that there are ways that we can do that while not alienating segments of the community or entering ourselves into something that is much larger and beyond us in our community. Because unfortunately, we know objectively it's become much more politicized over the years. And so I think that there's a better way, then we should pursue it as much as possible, memorialize it in our own unique way that doesn't step into something that no matter what decision you make, keep it or take it, it's going to in itself offend people who don't see it as being problematic or do. And we're never going to change their minds, so we find an alternative that still accomplishes the same goal.
And one other point that I think is, with that image, I think there's kind of a mixed message, because the background is the triggering thing. But the other part doesn't really have meaning for most of the public. It has meaning for law enforcement, and it has meaning for family and friends of that officer. So in a way, is the goal to memorialize to the public this officer, or is it more of a private memorial for law enforcement? Because it feels to me like you've got a double message there. The visual does one thing and the words do another that's much more limited in scope. And there might be a better way of achieving whichever goal is really intended.
Chief, the Blue Line has been around for a long time. Do you know when it started?
It was well before Black Lives Matter. I know that, but I don't know. I don't have a. It was, well, actually, it was, I think in the 1800s, there was a movement was it in England that used the blue line?
The thin blue line that is on a flag, right? So we've always talked about the thin blue line between order and chaos. That's always been associated with law enforcement, right? But this is different because it's placed on a flag.
Well, with the flag. So that's been around for a long time, too. Do you know when that, you don't know that one's been around? So it is a...
You have an answer?
So I believe that the thin blue line flag symbol was created in 2014 to show support for law enforcement. And the thin blue line symbol has been around for a long time.
Chief, would you like to talk about, in regards to the family members, of what they have said or what their wishes are?
Well, I think the question that you asked about the family members is a good one, because after I get these complaints, I mean, I'm trying to imagine what that conversation would look like with a family member of someone who had their loved one killed, to say, you know what, some people object to the memorial that we have of your spouse, and so we're going to have to take it off our cars. I have a hard time saying that to my staff, much less a spouse of someone who was killed. So it's, I think David's, I think one of the big issues that we have is the double standard, and David addressed that when he talked about, show them both. I guess in my mind, it's either you show them both or you don't show either one, I guess, because it does create a double standard, in my mind anyway.
So one of the things about this is memorializing Justin and the education to the community of what this is. And so instead of taking them down at the moment, looking towards the community to really have them understand what this represents, that it's a memorial that the officers and people that understand the law enforcement will understand. So educate the community of what this is and why it's there. I think that would be a better move currently. So I would propose that we do that instead of making changes of the vehicles.
Kind of like a national night out, advertised well. educated public?
Yes, I mean, in a way, yes, but just so that people are aware of, what this is.
Maybe so. I think awareness is important, but I think ultimately we want to create something that is different, that still achieves the goal. Then maybe we use, the amazing social media that the Pullman Police Department has and solicit, I'd like to believe our community will be positive in response to have suggestions on how to memorialize this officer on the vehicles. And it gives them some input on recognizing how important officers play in our community, and that we want to respect those that unfortunately lose their lives in service, that it accomplishes the goal and involves the community. It educates those that we need it most, and it solicits their input in doing something positive in support of law enforcement. And it takes it away from the negative, which is a debate on if it should or shouldn't, to say, we've decided we want something different, and we'd like a little bit of suggestions on what that could look like. That would be my recommendation.
Well, one question along those lines I want to ask is, so I assume probably like the people who complained, you probably didn't ask them, well, how would you like to see these officer memorialized? Or did you probe at all to see whether they're like, no, we don't want to see officers memorialized, or whether they're like,
No, it was the
do
flag.
it this way? What's that?
It was the flag that they objected to.
Okay. So, I mean, even, because in one sense, I feel like there's many people who would look at this and be absolutely great with it, right? But the people who aren't, how would they like to see an officer memorialized, right? Because, anyway, just.
Chief, you have talked with some of those people who complain, so what do they say after you explain what?
Actually, I've received 2 complaints. The first person that complained, and when I explained what it was, they said, oh, okay. And the other person said that, well, some people still find that flag objectionable.
Would you like any further discussion, or what would you like, Chief?
I think maybe I need to think about it for a while and maybe come back to the next meeting. I kind of like what David suggested, but when Barbara was asking who was it for, I think it is a lot for the police officers just to have that reminder every day when they walk out to their patrol car. And that's probably more so for them than it is the public, honestly.
So one question I just want to throw out, and I don't know if this would make any difference, but if it's primarily for the officers, would there be, like, say, put it inside the vehicle somewhere or something? Maybe that's not feasible, but I mean, is there a way for them to do it?
Well, I think the whole point of it is to display it.
Oh, okay.
Yes, to display and to show support of your fallen officer, so that's what it's for. So any other further comments, because we're going to close this? Isabella?
Is there like another non-politically charged image you could use in place of that still represents that person and other officers that have died in the line of work, but still does not carry that heavily political and political behind it? Sorry, I don't know how to use my words right now. But could there be that? That is my biggest question with this whole amount of talk. Could there be?
Isabella, that is a great question, and one I believe that Chief will think about and address, and I do like David's idea too. That is a great suggestion, and so we will take that. I know, Phyllis, you had one more comment.
It's just, unfortunately, to even say it, but there's no way we're ever going to please 100% of the people. There's no matter what is done, somebody's not going to like it. And, that's obviously not an answer to our dilemma, but it's kind of a reality.
That is true.
I see what you're saying, but I don't know. We didn't used to have this. We used to be able to say, gosh, this horrible thing happened, and we memorialize this beautiful person for giving their life for their community and their country without putting something offensive in the back. There used to be a shield. There used to be a simple answer. So I'm not sure why it went and changed. So that's my solution. I'm not sure why it changed.
Is it was extremists, right? This wasn't police, right? It was co-opted by radical extremists. It was sold as propaganda by radical extremists.
No, I don't mean the flag.
But that's what I mean,
No,
though,
you're
right?
right.
Like,
But
it
why did
wasn't
it go
that.
from something neutral, like
Yeah.
a police badge with his badge number, whatever, on there with a black?
Well, I think what David's saying is the flag at one point was neutral, and then all of a sudden it became politicized.
Yes, but I'm also saying there's also another solution that doesn't have to do with the flag. Yeah.
There is another solution, but right now Chief is going to take that back and think about
No,
it.
I
So we are
agree.
going to go on to our
No,
next
I agree.
topic
Can I
of
say one last thing?
conversation.
But please understand, gosh, you have our love and sympathy and honor, and you do hard jobs, and we get it. And there's no way that you're objective about this because your heart's in it, and I don't mean that disrespectfully. I mean that you all live it. I go home and I get in my car, and unless somebody hits me on my way to a Pullman Police Advisory Committee meeting, my life is pretty darn safe. So we get what you're saying, and we feel for you. Please understand.
Yeah, and I appreciate the everyone's input, and I understand that how that is viewed by some people. I mean, we just have to accept that, but trying to navigate that is difficult.
All right, Chief, we're going to move on to the police reform legislation. So might as well go back up on the podium.
Well, I think I'm going to put this up here and try to do it remotely from my seat. So there were a number of bills, police reform bills, that were passed by the state legislature this year. I did a report to City Council on it at the last council meeting, and I think I sent a link out to that council meeting recording. This will be somewhat of a rerun if you watch that. But we could talk for an hour on each one of these bills, and so I'm not going to be able to go into a lot of detail. So I'm just going to kind of give you the highlights of what these bills look like. I probably have to turn the power on. Yeah, that makes a difference. Okay, the first one is House Bill 1054 Tactics. And by the way, you can go on a state website where you can enter in a bill number, and it will pop up with all of the information about that bill, and you can read all the detail that you want. So this is just an overview of 1054. So prohibits chokeholds and neck restraints, and I'll talk about some of these in a little bit of detail that are probably the most impactful to us. So we've never trained or used chokeholds, but we have trained and used a neck restraint, which is called the vascular neck restraint. The difference between that and a chokehold is a chokehold cuts off someone's airway, and a neck restraint is something that will cut off the blood supply to the brain and have someone go unconscious long enough for you to restrain them in handcuffs, and is fairly safe, at least the science that I've seen. It's a fairly safe hold. But in any case, they've kind of been grouped into one type of a use of force, and so they've both been prohibited. So we have removed that from our use of force options, and we've trained all of our officers now on alternatives to using a neck restraint. It prohibits no-knock warrants. This is something that's fairly rare in Washington State, and in the 11 years that I've been in Pullman, I don't think we've ever obtained a no-knock warrant. and essentially allows officers to go in unannounced to serve a search warrant, which in some cases has resulted in deadly consequences. So that's not really impactful to us. Prohibits use of tear gas except for a riot, barricaded subject, or hostage situation. Those are the typical examples that we would use tear gas for. There's a little bit of complication to this from another bill, or actually it's from the same bill, and I'll explain that in a second. And also, use of tear gas must be authorized by highest elected official. So in Pullman, that would be the mayor. So the mayor would have to give the okay to deploy tear gas. So the next one prohibits use or acquisition of military equipment. And they provide a definition of military equipment, which includes any firearm greater than a 50 caliber weapon. So we have what's called a 40 millimeter impact weapon, and it's a 40 millimeter because it's about this big around, but it's a foam device that is shot to stun someone and enough time to also take them into custody. We can use it with someone who's armed with a knife or something like that, and we don't have to get close to them. It's very accurate. It replaced beanbag weapon that we previously used because it's much more accurate and less apt to cause any kind of damage to someone. So because of the definition of what military equipment is, we lost the use of that, at least for now. That also is a device that is used to launch tear gas. So we currently don't have a way to deploy tear gas other than throwing it by hand, and you usually don't want to be that close when you deploy tear gas. You want to launch it some distance. So because of that definition, then we've lost really the ability to use tear gas and to use our impact weapon, which the impact weapon is a less lethal weapon. Requires uniformed officers to be identifiable. We're already doing that. It essentially requires some type of a name or ID number or some way to identify a specific officer. Prohibit shooting at a moving vehicle. This is something we've added to our policy because it's, I forget how it was worded before, but we had limitations on it because it is fairly dangerous. And prohibits vehicular pursuits with some exceptions. And so this one, there are some issues, a big impact to us. So in order to go into a vehicle pursuit, the officer has to have probable cause that a violent crime or sex offense occurred. And those are defined in the RCW of Washington, and they're essentially extremely serious crimes such as kidnapping, murder, manslaughter, those types of crimes. So the term probable cause, let me give you a couple of definitions here because they're used in some of these bills. So probable cause is when you have enough to arrest someone for a crime. So it requires evidence, first of all, evidence that a crime occurred, and also evidence that a specific person committed that crime. So it's a standard that allows police officers to arrest someone, but only if they have evidence of those two things. Reasonable suspicion, on the other hand, is a lower standard that's defined as facts and circumstances that would lead a reasonable officer to believe a crime is or has been committed by that person. So, for example, we get a call of a burglary in progress, an officer comes up on the scene and they see somebody climbing out the window carrying a pillowcase full of stuff. Well, before we talk to anyone or get any evidence that for sure a crime has occurred or that that person is committing a crime, we're allowed to detain someone under the reasonable suspicion standard while we investigate and determine if there's enough probable cause to arrest them for that crime. So courts have recognized that having that ability to detain someone under reasonable suspicion is needed when we come up on scenes like that to determine whether there's probable cause or not. So in this particular case, under vehicle pursuits, we have to have probable cause that a violent crime occurred and that person committed it, meaning that if we have the same information about somebody that maybe we get a call of maybe a murder just occurred even, and here's a description of the car leaving, well, until we can investigate enough to get evidence of the crime and that person committed that crime, we can't detain them. We can't use physical force to detain that person or go into a vehicle pursuit because we haven't established probable cause yet. So that's a big change into what we'll be able to do as far as vehicle pursuits.
Chief, just a quick question, just to ease some of the community's mind. My understanding is that some agencies are advising officers to follow that person or vehicle and then, stop them, or follow them till they've stopped, or if they've made a mistake, look for something to be able to pull the car over. Is that, so I mean, the way it's worded in the memo, which prompted some concerns and questions, was that you couldn't do anything, that you just kind of have to go, well, I can't really.
So a pursuit means we chase somebody who's refusing to stop.
Yes, because it's about detaining, using your vehicle
Well,
to
not yet.
stop.
This is just the pursuit part. There isn't going to be something coming up here about detaining someone. So if we try to pull someone over and then they speed away at high speed, we can't drive at a high speed after them with lights and siren because that's a pursuit. So unless they're just driving the speed limit and stopping for all of the stop signs and red lights, yeah, we can follow them if they're doing that. But if they do anything more than that, we wouldn't be able to stay up with them. Does that answer your question?
So if they exceed the speed limit at an unsafe level, you would then they've now violated a traffic law, correct?
If it's not a violent crime or sex offense identified in the RCW, then we can't chase them. Unless we can make a case that there was also an exception if there's imminent threat to safety of others or safety risks of failing to apprehend the person. So just speeding would not rise to that level. If we had someone one of the exceptions is drunk driving. So we would be able to chase someone for drunk driving. But if someone, say, was driving up on the sidewalk by people and things like that, then I would say that would create a situation where there was threat of imminent harm to someone. But someone just speeding away from you would not rise to that level. The first couple of here, I'm going to spend probably a little bit more time than the other ones because these are the most impactful to us. So don't worry, we won't be here till 8 o'clock again tonight. House Bill 1310, use of force. This is another one that's very impactful. So this is where we get into the detention part of it again. So it authorizes an officer to use force only to make an arrest. So again, that's with probable cause, when we have probable cause, or to prevent an escape. And this is an escape of someone who we think might have committed a crime. It's defined in the RCW as essentially after someone's been arrested and incarcerated or handcuffed, and then they're trying to get away. You can use force to detain that person, or to protect against imminent threat of bodily injury. So what that means, again, officers are pulling up to that person climbing out the window with a pillowcase, and they start running away, and we ask them to stop. We can't use any kind of physical force to detain them until we investigate the crime to the point that we have probable cause to make an arrest. So this is something that is done very frequently when we respond to calls where we believe a crime has occurred. We are able to detain someone and conduct an investigation and sort everything out and then determine if we have probable cause to arrest someone. We can still do that if someone is voluntarily willing to stay, but if someone wants to walk away, we can't use any physical force to stop them. So this is one that has a very big impact on our ability to investigate crimes. A lot of evidence is collected and obtained during those first parts of our arrival on a crime that just occurred. Deadly force is authorized to protect against an imminent threat of serious physical injury or death. This is not a big change as far as when deadly force can be used. Must exhaust available de-escalation tactics prior to using force, taking as much time as necessary and leaving the area if there's no threat of imminent harm and no crime involved. So, it's clear that the intent of the legislation is to have less police involvement in activity that is not directly crime-related. We're trying to figure this one out, particularly when it talks about taking as much time as necessary. What does that really mean? So we're, is it 2 minutes? Is it 2 hours? Is it longer? There's not a lot of definition provided on this. And I'll also note that the authors of the two bills that we've talked about so far have acknowledged that there is some fixes needed to address some of these ambiguities in these bills. Continuation of HB 1310. Let's see. Well, this sounds good, and this is right. When using physical force, officer must use the least amount of physical force necessary. The standard right now is that officers are able to use force that's necessary to overcome the resistance. The addition of must use the least amount of physical force also creates a little bit of an issue with how that's determined and by whom. And that's always going to be reviewed with 20/20 hindsight after an officer has, say, come into contact with someone that has a knife, and let's say they decide to use pepper spray. And so the question could be, well, why didn't they talk to him longer, or why didn't they use a baton, or what could have been used that was lesser force? So again, there's a lot of ambiguity, at least from our perspective on this one. So it puts officers in a very difficult position. But we have to figure it out until at least the Attorney General develops a model policy by July 1st, 2022. Then they'll provide some more direction for us. But until then, we're trying to figure this out as it was written. And then when we also have to develop policies and submit them to the Attorney General's office, who will publish them. And then training to be provided by the Criminal Justice Training Commission. I think we'll see some movement on this soon. I believe that the author of these two bills was convinced to ask the Attorney General for an opinion about how to interpret these and provide a little bit more clarity for law enforcement. So we hear that the Attorney General is working on that. We may be getting something more from the Attorney General on this. And I think at the very least there's a commitment to go back over these bills in the next legislative session next year and help out law enforcement with some definitions and some rewording. Senate Bill 5051 is about certification and decertification of law enforcement officers. So it sets up criteria for what would be mandatory decertification and different conduct by law enforcement, which would result in decertification. CJTC is Criminal Justice Training Commission. They are the commission that governs law enforcement in the state of Washington and provides rules and guidance, and provides training as well and authorizes training. So previously they didn't have any investigative powers, and so now with this legislation they have the authority to conduct investigations into officer misconduct. They can also issue public recommendations about agency issues such as policy, training, command decisions, and things like that. Expand some of the background check requirements for new police officers. And any time that there's any death or serious injury caused by use of force, or if an officer is charged with a crime, the Criminal Justice Training Commission must be notified immediately or face a $10,000 civil penalty. And then personnel records retention previously was based on, the state has a whole myriad of public records retention sections that, based on the type of document it is, has a different retention period. Now, anything that's personnel related to law enforcement has a 10-year retention period past the time that they're employed with the law enforcement agency. So there's a lot more authority given to the Criminal Justice Training Commission and a lot more accountability statewide.
Chief Jenkins, quick question. Does the personnel data retention, does that include their body-worn camera, or does that get to fall off?
No, that wouldn't be considered a personnel record. And then the Criminal Justice Training Commission has to maintain a public searchable database on decertifications. And then, and the last one, I don't know that there was any issue about this before, but this cements that the Training Commission has the sole authority to provide basic law enforcement training in the state. There's advanced training that's provided by a number of different organizations, but the basic training as far as the police academy is completely under the jurisdiction of the Criminal Justice Training Commission.
Does that impact you sending officers to Spokane?
No, because that's all advanced training. Well, the Criminal Justice Training Commission certifies the Spokane Academy as a state academy. So as long as they continue to do that, we're able to send officers to that basic academy. The Senate Bill 5066, duty to intervene. This is something that we had a policy created before this bill was passed. It requires intervening and reporting to a supervisor upon witnessing any excessive force by another officer, and that intervening includes rendering first aid. Prohibits an agency from retaliating for officers reporting possible excessive force in good faith. An agency has to notify Criminal Justice Training Commission of any discipline for violating this section, and they will also be developing a model policy and training. We have a policy in place right now that meets all this criteria. House Bill 1267 creates a new office in the Office of the Governor that's called the Office of Independent Investigations. So this office will be authorized to review or investigate any use of deadly force by a law enforcement officer in the state. And essentially they're able to select any case that they want to. They're also authorized to review and investigate prior deadly force investigations if there's new evidence that came to light after it was originally investigated. Agencies have to notify the office of any type of event that they would have jurisdiction to investigate. And there's an advisory board that oversees this office. And when the Office of Independent Investigations is conducting an investigation, this advisory board can also determine whether the investigation should be expanded beyond the original scope of the investigation. This talks about audits of investigations. The State Auditor's Office with the Criminal Justice Training Commission conducts compliance audits to make sure that deadly force investigations are done thoroughly and objectively. That one's pretty straightforward. So there's a lot of police accountability measures that were passed. So this is a bill that was in response to a previous Supreme Court case, State versus Blake, which essentially held our possession of controlled substance law unconstitutional because the wording in the Washington state law for possession of marijuana did not include the word knowingly. So someone could theoretically possess controlled substance and not know it. In this particular case, it was a Spokane case where someone was detained by police. They found some drugs in their pocket, and the person said that, I don't remember the full story, but it either wasn't their pants or they didn't know they had the drugs in the pocket. So because we didn't have knowingly in our law, the Supreme Court said, well, that's unconstitutional. That someone has to have knowledge in order to commit that crime. So for a while, we didn't have any law that prohibited possession of a controlled substance. So this created a law that made possession of controlled substance a misdemeanor, but requires that someone be given an opportunity to go to a recovery services plan 2 different times before they can be held criminally liable for possession of drugs. So this explains that part of it. It also changed some of the wording on the drug paraphernalia possession law. Talks about encouraging prosecutors to divert simple possession to assessment, treatment, or other services, which is really not a change from what we do now because we do have a drug court in Whitman County. It will add training for law enforcement in the basic academy on dealing with persons with substance abuse disorders, and then also funds those services that will be required to refer people to before they can be arrested. Our drug court is fairly active, right, David? Are you familiar with that? This will be effective in January of 2022, recording of custodial interrogations. So this requires any time that we interrogate an adult on a felony charge or a juvenile, someone under the age of 18 on any type of an offense, we have to electronically record it. If it's at our facility, then it has to be audio and video. If it's not at our facility, then it at least has to be by audio. Washington State is a 2-party consent state for recordings, meaning that generally to record a conversation, you have to have the consent of both parties. This creates an exception for that, for the 2-party consent. And then also if law enforcement does not follow the requirements here, they will likely lose any admissions that are obtained as a result. This is a continuation, requires juvenile access to an attorney for consultation prior to a juvenile waiving any constitutional rights. So generally, when we are going to interview a suspect that's in custody or a juvenile that's not in custody, we read them their Miranda rights, that they have a right to remain silent, they have a right to an attorney, they don't have to talk to us. So basically this says that we have to provide them an attorney before we talk to them, and juveniles can't even waive their rights. They can't say that they want to talk to us. So we can't talk with a juvenile suspect that's in custody until they're able to talk with an attorney. Here again, it explains a little bit more. Prohibits a juvenile from waiving their right. And then the Office of Public Defense has to provide accessibility to attorneys for juveniles.
Chief, do we know how well staffed they are to meet that need, or what that need is in our community?
Do you have an idea? I mean, when we arrest people now and they want to talk to an attorney, unless they have like a family attorney's cell phone number on them, it's difficult to get. Are they able to get to a public defender at night and weekends usually?
Yeah, usually there's somebody on call, or they'll answer the phone, and we can go down the list until we get somebody. But in this circumstance, from what I've heard, they were going to provide one attorney that was going to handle those calls statewide.
House Bill 1088, potential impeachment disclosure. So this centers around what's called Brady, and what Brady is that if an officer has any type of conduct regarding honesty or excessive use of force, then that can be used as impeachment evidence if an officer testifies at a trial. So this provides some more, I guess, shoring up of what that, the Brady requirements are. So it reestablishes the types of conduct that must be disclosed. So this is disclosed not just to the prosecuting attorney, but disclosed to the defense. And it sets up criteria for how it's shared and maintained, and under what circumstances an officer can be removed from that list. Requires Brady public impeachment disclosure protocols to be reviewed every 2 years. I think there's more on this one. So there's going to be training provided by the Criminal Justice Training Commission. Law enforcement must report to the Criminal Justice Training Commission any disclosures within 10 days of their being aware of the Brady violation. And then it also requires, as far as a background check, when hiring police officers, if they were a police officer somewhere else, to specifically inquire about the Brady issue. Essentially, I think the way our department looks at it is if somebody's on the Brady list and they're, because of an issue with honesty or excessive use of force, they're really not going to be an effective police officer because their testimony can be easily impeached at any type of a trial that they would testify. So when we ever have an issue with honesty with our staff, that's essentially a fatal error on their part. And so this isn't something that we would hope to find ourselves having to deal with, but nonetheless, this is in effect. Well, and I think the other part of this, and I don't have it on here, but I believe another part of this is that a law enforcement agency cannot take any type of an employment action against someone because they're placed on a Brady list, which kind of puts us in a little bit difficult situation, but we're able to take disciplinary action against someone for misconduct on its own. But just by the fact that they're put on a Brady list, we can't take any action. But we can take action for the conduct that put them on a Brady list. House Bill 1320, protection orders. There's been a lot of changes in protection orders. And did you read much of this one, Jake? Yeah. We've really been focused on a lot of the other ones, but and I think that they've made protection orders, a lot more of the ones that maybe weren't enforceable are now enforceable, is kind of from looking at some of the language here. And we can now recognize Canadian domestic violence protection orders. And under certain protection orders, sometimes those that are subject to those have to surrender any weapons that they have. And I don't think there was a provision before for revoking a concealed pistol license, but now there is.
Do you recall when that goes effective?
I think it probably July 25th it did. Because I put the date, a later date on the ones that were later. And it repealed 137 existing statutes related. So again, I'm sorry I don't know a whole lot of detail on this particular one. And I believe now school districts are more involved as well in protection orders, and they're required to, if someone makes them aware of a protection order, they have certain requirements of them. This is about grievance arbitration panels, and basically this is about employment actions and employees grieving an action against them, and it just establishes a list of the arbitrators that can hear those cases. And that, because we have a collective bargaining agreement with our police guild that expires at the end of this year. So, and we have provisions in that agreement that covers this, so those will be recognized until their current contract expires. Data collection, so this, the Attorney General is required to contract with the Education of Higher Learning to establish and administer a law enforcement use of force reporting system. Any status on WSU's application for that, David?
Yeah, I wrote it, so we're just waiting for the AG's office. So originally, as a little bit of background, we were selected. So I'd worked with the AG's office for about 6 months. We were selected, and then we advised that it should be an open call so that all institutions of higher ed, it wouldn't be just WSU written in to do this. So the AG's office will release the RFP once the advisory board is put together. All this law does is establish the bare minimum data collection that has to be collected, and then the advisory board will make recommendations for additional data that they want collected, and then universities in Washington, higher ed, will have to then submit a full proposal. Our proposal, WSU's, is written with the exception of updating it for the new items at the advisory board. We hope that we'll be selected. So we'll find out next year.
So there is a voluntary national system that we participate in, but the data elements are just a couple. It's very minimal. The data elements, at least that they're showing right now, is a lot more comprehensive. So this lays out what information that right now, at least, that they want to collect. And it includes not only if someone is injured, but also if an officer discharged a firearm at or in the direction of a person, or even pointed a firearm at a person. Use a chokehold or vascular neck restraint, which are not lawful anymore. Use the taser. So essentially any use of force. Our officers fill out a use of force form. We assess use of force as anything above essentially handcuffing. So grabbing someone's arm to move them or something like that is considered use of force. So our officers fill out a form, and it goes to Commander Opgenorth, who then reviews the police report and all the body cam video of everyone that was on scene to determine whether there's any violations of the policy. This is just more on the data collection.
Just one thing for us, the public to know, this is the first effort any state has ever done. So Washington is the first state to mandate a broad data collection. I think that we look at these bills and yes, there's some ambiguity around some of them, but this is the most impactful reform effort we've seen since really the 1960s. This is a profound shift in data collection, and one of the purposes of 5259 is to really document police interactions so that the data helps law enforcement. And I think it is worth letting the public understand that particularly this bill had widespread support among law enforcement. WASPIC, WSP, all were on board because this is data that inevitably can help an agency. And so we're really excited. Hopefully the WSU will be selected, but even if we're not, being able to contribute this data is going to be profound. I mean, just imagine being able to run a query to know, how many police contacts occurred in a particular county. We can't do that now. How many were officer initiated or dispatch initiated? We can't do it. The individual department can, but if you want to compare yourself to another department, you want to see how your population growth might impact that, they can't do it. And that is simply untenable in the times we find ourselves in the data systems we have.
And we found even when trying to compare our numbers to another agency, because our use of force this definition has such a low threshold, our numbers could be higher than a larger agency that has a lot more use of force just because of how we define it. So this will help standardize all of that. So those are all the new bills. I'll say the same thing I said to council. In law enforcement, I mean, there's legislative changes every year. So, and there's case law that changes the way that we operate because of court decisions. So making changes and adapting to these types of things is nothing new for us. You probably have seen a lot of comments by law enforcement this year. I've been in law enforcement for 47 years, and this is the most change I've seen at one time ever in law enforcement. So there's a lot of impact. There's a lot of changes. There's some really good things here, like David was pointing out. There's some things that we're still trying to figure out, and I'm hopeful that at least by next legislative session we'll get all those things worked out.
Thank you, Chief. Are there any questions or comments?
I have one comment. Going way back to the beginning, why would it be a good idea to require the highest elected official to authorize the use of tear gas? I mean, I can't imagine that Mayor Johnson's judgment would be better than yours, Chief.
I think the idea was to take it out of the hands of law enforcement and to put it in the hands of someone who reports directly to the community that's elected and is not someone that is, I guess, swayed by the law enforcement perspective. I'm speculating, but based on the legislation, that's my thought.
It seems like that could be cumbersome, though.
I think it depends on the jurisdiction. So, I think in our case, Mayor Johnson has a lot of confidence in our expertise and our ability and would probably rely a lot on what our suggestion would be, but there could be communities where that doesn't exist as well.
Thank you.
Any further comments or questions? Thank you, David. Thank you, Chief. That was very educational. One question, though. What did City Council discuss? Because I did not watch the link.
It was at the last council meeting, which would have been 2 weeks ago tomorrow, I think.
Did they have any discussion items or questions for you?
Yes.
And?
So I issued a news release the week before the council meeting about the impact of the new legislation. And there was some negative feedback received from the community about that news release, and I think some were interpreting it to be that we were pushing back on the legislation. And that certainly wasn't the intent. The intent was to inform the public of impacts on how we would be able to respond in comparison to prior to the legislation. And so there were some questions about that I spoke a little bit about to clarify what our intention was, and also that it wasn't pushback. We're used to having to adapt to changes, and there were a number of items in the bills that we were in favor of and we agreed with. So I was able to help, I think, rectify some of those misconceptions.
Great. Well, thank you for that very educational presentation. I appreciate that. Would you like to continue with the police department update?
I would love to. Anything that I missed that?
No, you covered it great.
Good answer. All right, let's see here. So a staffing update, we are authorized 33, our current staffing at 29. We are working on 3 background investigations right now for the last 3 that are left from our prior recruitment. We are running a continuous recruitment for police officers, so as soon as we get enough applicants who meet the minimum qualifications to conduct interviews, we will do that. We have 1 vacancy in records, and we're conducting interviews on Thursday for records. A COVID-19 update, just from the city perspective, we're not requiring employees to wear masks if they've been vaccinated in the workplace, but if they have not been vaccinated, they're supposed to wear a mask. We take our cues really from the State Department of Health and the County Department of Health, as well as Labor and Industries, as far as what we require our staff to do. And they have not made any changes recently, so we are continuing on our current requirements. The chief selection process is in progress, and the first round of interviews is going to be August 17th. And then there'll be a second round of interviews on August 30th. So the first round, the city's already gone through the applications and narrowed down the applicants to those who meet the minimum qualifications and were the top based on their application and resume. And they will be part of the first round of interviews, and then the scoring from that first round will reduce the field a little bit more to a final round of interviews at the end of August. I will be presenting the 2019 and 2020 Police Department annual reports to the City Council at their meeting August 24th. We were a year behind. Well, I was a year behind on the annual reports, mainly because of COVID and my additional responsibilities as a city's emergency manager during that year. So anyway, I'll be doing the previous 2 years' annual report at one time, and I can do a report for the Police Advisory Committee as well after those are completed. That's all I have.
Thank you. Are there any questions or comments? Can you speak into a microphone, please?
Can the community observe the interviews, or how does that work for the police chief?
So they can. It's not an open process. Sometimes there is an element of that. I know when I was hired, we had in-person interviews with at least 2 different panels in the day, and then at night there was a community forum where the public could come and ask questions and that type of thing. I don't think they're going to have that as part of this one. There are a number of different interview panels that are being convened to interview each candidate that represents a large cross-section of the community. Stephanie's actually representing the Police Advisory Committee on one of the panels.
Any other questions or comments? Yes?
I have one not related to this, but.
Okay, well, what is your question? We can
Okay.
move on.
So I've had a couple people talking about how they'd like to see a crosswalk. I know this is more of a city thing, but at the intersection of Center Street and Tanya Drive crossing Center Street. I think people are feeling like there's quite a bit of pedestrian traffic headed, on the paths behind Tanya and then out on behind Center Street off to Sunnyside Park and stuff. And visibility for pedestrian, the visibility there is so in terms of how long you can see cars coming and stuff, and Center Street gets sort of busy at times, so.
I believe there is a plan to potentially put a roundabout at that intersection. And the other thing that seems counterintuitive, but from engineering studies, they found that in many cases crosswalks make it more dangerous for pedestrians because it provides a false sense of security. So that's an issue as well. I know that a couple of years ago there was a traffic study done that included Center Street all the way from Grand and then up through past Regency there. And I think the consultant's conclusion was that a roundabout would probably be the best solution at that location. And I don't know where that is as far as in the plan, but I know that they've looked at that intersection as an issue for speeding vehicles as well as pedestrians.
Yeah, and obviously, something that slows the cars down, you know, helps a lot, because that's the thing. You know?
Yeah, no, yeah, Center Street is definitely an issue, and also Center and Grand, I believe the traffic signal that I kind of hear is going to be next year, every year, might be next year, actually, so we'll see.
Okay.
So we are out of time, but does anybody have anything to report on their constituency that they would like to share? Yes, Isela.
Pullman High School's starting again, so that's really exciting. It's starting the 25th, but there is a mask mandate for K through 12. Doesn't bother me. I love wearing a mask, as you can tell. We have Greyhound Gear Up today and tomorrow from 9 through 3:30 p.m. So that's going to be fun.
Yes, it was a blast today when I went, and I'll go again tomorrow.
Woo, sounds fun.
Wonderful. Anybody else? All right, our next meeting is September 13th. As we have no public, we do not have a public comment, so we are adjourned. Thank you very much.